Russia is trying to designate the occupied Transnistria as its own territory. President Volodymyr Zelenskyi stated this while commenting on Moscow's decision to simplify the process of obtaining Russian citizenship for residents of this region. According to the head of state, the Kremlin has two key objectives here.
It's a specific move. It means not only that Russia is looking for new soldiers this way, since citizenship entails military duty. This is also Russia marking the territory of Transnistria as supposedly its own. In Moscow, they often tell various interlocutors that they are supposedly only interested in Donbass. In reality, it's far from just Donbass. We have to respond to this. All the more so because the Russian military contingent and the presence of special services in Transnistria are also a challenge for us. We are interested in a stable, strong Moldova.
By distributing Russian passports, Russia wants to use the occupied Transnistria to mobilize additional human resources for the war against Ukraine. This was stated by the President of Moldova, Sandu. According to her, this is not only an attempt to find new cannon fodder, but also a direct element of pressure on Chisinau through attempts to reintegrate Transnistria. Here is a quote.
Apparently, they need more people to send to the war in Ukraine. Since the war in Ukraine began, most people from the region have obtained Moldovan citizenship because they felt safer having citizenship of the Republic of Moldova rather than Russian citizenship. Sandu, President of Moldova.
We have Serhiy Bratchuk joining us live. He is a military expert and spokesperson for the Ukrainian Volunteer Army. Greetings to you, Mr. Serhiy.
Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the self-defense. Hello.
Glory to the heroes. Regarding Moldova and also the attempt to use the citizens of this region, yes, Transnistria, which is temporarily occupied for their own purposes. And in what way can they be used? After all, on one hand, there is sovereign Moldova, and on the other hand, sovereign Ukraine. Well, there are no corridors with Russia at all. Planes from Russia won't arrive, ships from Russia won't come. Helicopters also won't be able to do anything anywhere. How can they be used, except not at all?
They can be used for the purpose of provocation. Obviously, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, this is exactly what we encountered, because the first sabotage and reconnaissance groups were sent into Ukraine precisely from the so-called Transnistria. Although, on the other hand, we also saw the so-called mobilization gatherings of the so-called Transnistrian army being held again in 2022. Well, first of all, the contingent is, let's be honest, not combat capable accordingly. On the other hand, we saw how people were taking Moldovan passports, fleeing to Moldova to avoid being drafted into these gatherings, because they understood the local FSB, the local Russian occupiers, could use them, in fact, for those provocations I mentioned earlier. Well, in fact, these people have a lot of passports in their possession. These are Moldovan passports and Ukrainian passports as well. Unfortunately, these also include passports of the Russian Federation. It is quite likely that some of these people using a Moldovan passport and certain channels could indeed fly to Moscow, and within a very short period of time. I understand where our viewers are watching from, and I want to remind everyone of this. They will perish on the front lines of the Russian-Ukrainian war. But when it comes to provocations, things are very serious here, which is why the President of Ukraine is talking about the corresponding challenges and risks. And once again, I want to remind everyone, this is not just the so-called Transnistria. This is a temporarily occupied territory of the Republic of Moldova, occupied by the Russians. And in fact, I believe that one of the outcomes of the Russian-Ukrainian war should be that Moldova regains its historical lands, and then there will be peace and tranquility. Although, of course, for now, this is primarily an internal matter for Moldova. But I think there will be good people who, at the very least, can comment from the perspective of international law, can advise the Moldovan authorities on what and how things should be done. There is a challenge, and most importantly, we know how to respond to it.
And while we are here talking with you, and our viewers are watching our conversation, hundreds of drones are massively attacking Moscow and the Moscow region. In the suburbs of the Russian capital, the Transneft oil refinery and the fuel station for petroleum products are on fire. In Dubna, near Moscow, drones struck the Russian machine-building design bureau Raduga, which specializes in the development of cruise missiles. A fire broke out on the premises of the Angstrom enterprise, which is a manufacturer of semiconductor products. By the way, this facility is under US sanctions. Moscow Mayor Comrade Sobyanin reports that air defense allegedly shoots down drones, and local residents are actively sharing footage of such shootdowns. The enemy systems traditionally bring down drones onto residential buildings, or the missiles themselves hit them. There is a lot of destruction. Debris from one of the drones fell on the territory of Sheremetyevo airport, and this night they were also fending off drones in temporarily occupied Crimea. After the drone raid, a fire broke out in the area of the Kacha and Belbek airfields near Sevastopol, where the Russians store fighter jets and air defense systems. Monitoring channels report hits on enemy radar complexes and strikes on a center for storing and launching attack drones. And President Volodymyr Zelenskyi spoke about Ukrainian long-range strikes. According to him, the strikes were carried out at a distance of almost 1,000 kilometers from the front line. Military and oil facilities in Russia were under attack. Here is a quote: "These are entirely fair responses from us to what the Russians are doing. We will continue to increase both the range and the number of sanctions applied. Thank you to everyone who contributes to our strength." Volodymyr Zelenskyi, President of Ukraine. Mr. Serhiy, let's go step by step. And let's start, among other things, with the fact that Russian air defense is, well, confusing its own buildings with drones. And that's exactly what the locals are pointing out, right? They record their little video circles on social media, post them, and then, in a state of total panic with trembling hands, they desperately tell the world how their Russian anti-aircraft air defense systems are supposedly protecting them. And what do you call this? The domino effect. Everything is slowly falling apart. Well, when it seems like there is air defense, but in reality there isn't much of it actually working.
Well, firstly, Russian citizens who have suffered from Russian air defense systems may in the future join an international tribunal and file appropriate claims against war criminals, the military of the Russian Federation, who, at least today, have struck local residents' homes with missiles, among other things. There is such evidence, including video evidence. Accordingly, the materials exist. Well, let's say it's a 100% win-win case. As for the air defense systems, today a rather rhetorical question may arise in Russian so-called society. What will happen next? Next, it will be such that the air defense systems, which were even brought in for the parade, by the way, if anyone still doubts that it was Ukraine that gave permission for the parade to be held in Moscow, so in fact, they will be pulling them back, as they say, pulling them back to the capital of the Moscow Ulus, in order to try, I emphasize try, to protect the Russian capital from the corresponding long-range sanctions of Ukraine's defense forces. Then the question arises, and the domino effect as well. What happens next? And after that, it's not just a domino effect. Next, there will be a corresponding reduction in the protection of those Russian territories where, among other things, oil refineries are located, as well as factories of the military-industrial complex, which are also connected to the strikes, Russian strikes, missiles and drones against Ukraine. Therefore, it is obvious that, well, let's say at least two things at once are being done today by the defense forces. They are exhausting the Russian air defense system and forcing the Russians to regroup their air defense assets accordingly. And as a rule, we can clearly see where these assets then reappear. This leaves the territory of the Russian Federation exposed. Well, really, who would say that this is a disadvantage for Ukraine? And it should be reminded that our sanctions are aimed at military facilities of the Russian Federation. Well, as for what Mayor Sobyanin is doing today, who in my opinion is the best air defense specialist in the Russian Federation, he reports the most about shootdowns. He should be appointed commander of the Moscow Air Defense District. He knows how to fight, he knows how to defend the Moscow capital, so he could have a great military career. So, continuing seriously, we see that the strikes by the defense forces, this is worth emphasizing, are directed against targets that are critical in the chain of the Russian Federation's military-industrial complex. You already mentioned today that we are talking about design bureaus that are connected, and by the way, we should also remind that there are production facilities as well. There are also relevant test ranges that are connected to missile development, specifically military missile development in the Russian Federation. Today, we are talking about strikes on specific facilities where Russian electronics for the military sector are produced. And of course, we are also talking about oil refineries and oil loading terminals. And of course, we cannot ignore such settlements as Durekino, where there are also relevant facilities of the Russian Federation's military-industrial complex and Russia's oil refining industry.
Thank you, Mr. Serhiy, for joining the conversation.
Thank you.
Serhiy Bratchuk was live with us. He is a military expert and spokesperson for the Ukrainian Volunteer Army.